Welcome to this climate series, and it's wonderful to have you join us today. I'm Rod Downing, and we'll give you a quick overview of the entire series and where today's session fits in. If you've just jumped in for the first time, no problem. That's the way we've set it up. But first, a brief overview of the entire series. While the topic is climate change crisis, the vision is the flourishing of life for all. All humans, no exceptions. All creatures, all life. Simply put, the peaceable kingdom will only be possible within a flourishing ecosystem. However, the team felt that an information...
That's probably good on the sweet tea. Yeah.
The team felt that an information-only series is not enough. Though, as you'll see on this slide, phase 2 will involve world-class scientists and others to help us clarify those ideas, issues, and solutions. But in phase 1, which is where we are, which has a strong emphasis on one of the church's golden threads, spirituality, an open heart, a transformative experience. Today is the third session in this first phase, each one going more deeply into that spiritual anchoring and hopefully evoking a more robust response than simply information sessions, moving us from that inner to the outer world and with more impactful actions. Further to actions, check our website. Apart from having the schedule and other details, there is a tab for actions, which we have just started to build. Look them over and see if any action resonates. Finally, during this section, we will be going into breakout groups twice. Please remember some basic rules. We are all God's children. We need each other. That's community. Be sure to separate people from issues and thus grant each person their God-given dignity and self-respect. In doing so, we can be greatly enriched. So let's get started with a poem.
I'm going to read a poem called Invitation by Mary Oliver. Oh, do you have time to linger for just a little while out of your busy and very important day? For the goldfinches that have gathered in the thistles, for a musical battle to see who can sing the highest note or the lowest, or the most expressive mirth, or the most tender. Their strong, blunt beaks drink the air as they strive melodiously, not for your sake and not for mine, not for the sake of winning, but for sheer delight and gratitude. Believe us, they say. It is a serious thing just to be alive on this fresh morning in this broken world. I beg you, do not walk by without pausing to attend to this rather ridiculous performance. It could mean something. It could mean everything. It could be what Rilke meant when he wrote, "You must change your life."
So let me add my welcome as we come together to explore this spiritual practice of holy attention and how it is that it might actually be relevant to our topic of climate change. Mary Oliver's such a wonderful poet. And she's the basis of this notice, gaze, cherish, bless way of expressing holy attention. She writes in this one place, what I write begins and ends with noticing and cherishing. And that's what we're here today, is to spend time listening into what it means to notice and cherish this, the beauty of this world, as well as its broken places. Those of you who've read An Altar in the World, Barbara Brown Taylor adds, gaze and bless. The mystics have known this for so long. One of my favorite of the desert mystics, Abba Basarian, at the point of death said, a monk ought to become like the cherubim or the seraphim, all eye. In other words, looking is the place we come to become fulfilled. Nothing is more essential to prayer than attentiveness. But what I've also been noticing as I've been working with these pieces for quite a while now is, and as I mentioned in conversation one, I am seeing this call, this invitation to look more deeply and see more clearly the interconnections between things in a lot of secular writers as well. As I mentioned when back, if you remember a couple months ago when we started the Nature as Refuge, Wendell Berry's poem, I mentioned that the Scottish philosopher Jonathan Rowson has observed that the gap between a person and this massive global challenge is so unfathomably enormous that while we know it is happening, we just can't feel in our hearts that it's happening. It's just too overwhelming. And up to now, we are feeling so helpless in the face of it. Stop and think about that. You know that's true. I feel helpless, and I know I don't act as if it's happening. He says the crisis of climate change in particular is a crisis of disconnection between facts and feelings. We know it's true. We don't feel that it's true. And so we don't live as if it's true. That is ultimately a spiritual problem in search of a spiritual, if not solution, a spiritual path forward that we might deepen this kind of looking. I also read this article by Nafis Ahmed, a journalist looking at scientific and systems theory, in which he explicitly links what's happening with what is happening in our country right now with the pandemic, with the riots, with the recognition of systemic racial injustice, in the collapse of the Earth's ecosystems. They all go back to a single thing. And that, he says, is a crisis of otherizing. We look at another, and instead of seeing someone also a creature of God, we see the other as something, whether human, that it's okay for us to enslave, or for resources for us to extract and use at the expense of everyone else. He says, if we're not confused, perplexed, and alarmed about this intensifying sequence of overlapping crises, we are not paying attention. It is time to start paying attention. We, the human species, stand at the dawn of a great civilizational inflection point. This is the fork in the road. So we need to face up to reality if we want to get through this. Until we begin developing the capacity to see and adapt to the complex interconnections between human systems and the wider natural systems in which they are embedded, we will be unable to move off a trajectory of accelerating societal and climate collapse. So, what does it mean for me to give up the habitual ways I see the world, in which I am judging, in which I am categorizing, in which I am using the other for my own ends, even if I do it subtly? The contemplative tradition, the Christian contemplative tradition, as well as all of many different faith journeys, recognize that it is in taking a long, loving look at the real that is the heart of spiritual practice. How will I learn to see in this way? Doug Christie, in his book, The Blue Sapphire of the Mind, says that the primary work of contemplative practice is to become more aware of the web of relationships and to live fully within it. He says, to retrieve a vision of the world as a whole through sustained attention to the underlying unity that connects all beings to one another and to the root causes in our thought and practice that contribute to the deepening fragmentation of self, community, and world, it is necessary to the work of healing that is the heart of any sustained ecological renewal. There is an explicit invitation to turn to our contemplative practices for a pathway towards ecological renewal. And it begins with the looking that sees not the other to be used and exploited for what it can offer me, but to see the other in its own intrinsic beauty and right and value. This is the invitation of our practice to holy attention that we're calling us today. And we're just beginning today. Some of you have maybe done this practice before. Some of you might have been trying it this month in response to our invitation. In a few moments, we're actually going to turn to this practice. I want to say just a couple of words before we begin, although what really matters is that you practice this practice. And to know that this takes time to develop the kind of practice that can expand our heart to be big enough to hold what's so overwhelming, which is that we are losing our world as we fragment it more and more deeply. How can we open our heart? Can we gaze with an act of love, and can that make a difference? So the heart of this practice is gazing. It's not the same as staring. It's not reaching out with your mind to try to grasp what it is you're looking at. It's not trying to take control. It's not trying to make something happen. There's this felt difference where gazing welcomes the other. So whatever happens for you as you practice this, as you try this out in the next 10 minutes with Emily, remember that gazing welcomes the other. It is soft, it is gentle, it's open, it's reverence, it's receptive. It doesn't pry, it doesn't use, it wonders. It does not control, it allows. And it honors and might create relationship between you and that on which you gaze. In holy attention, you're going to discover over time, it takes time, so be gentle with yourself too, both a focused attention on something, but also a more expansive awareness that holds the focus of your communion with the other. So as you practice, just let the other be the other. Let it be itself, its own particular subjective thou, holy. Think of it as looking at God, looking at the face of God in another creature. Bring a reverence, bring presence. And finally, the invitation is gaze not only at the holy other, but as you're gazing, gaze at your own heart gazing. Watch what it feels like in you to gaze as an act of love, as an act of welcoming, as an act of open receptivity to the other.
All right. Thank you so much, Lori. I'm going to guide us through the actual practice now. And you have a few different options for engaging in this practice. So if you brought along a leaf or another natural element to look at, you'll want to have that close. You might find yourself close to a window to gaze outside instead, or perhaps you'll feel drawn to the photograph that we'll have on the screen. In addition, towards the end of the practice, I'll be inviting you to do a little bit of journaling. So if you want to have something to write with close by, that will be really great too. If you've practiced holy attention since our last gathering, you'll remember that this practice invites us to this series that Lori was describing of noticing, gazing, cherishing, and blessing. With these interior movements in mind, I'll be guiding you through this practice, actually using a poem by Thomas Merton. This poem describes his own experience of looking and seeing the divine in the everyday. So with that, I invite you to find a comfortable position in your chair. You might put both feet on the ground. Try and feel the earth supporting you, beneath you, always there. And let's take 3 deep breaths together. Soften your gaze and find a little bit of stillness. Thomas Merton writes, "Beauty of sunlight falling on a tall vase of red and white carnation, and green leaves on the altar of the novitiate chapel. The light and the darkness of the fresh, crinkled flower, light warm and red all around the darkness. The flower is the same color as blood, but it is in no sense whatever as red as blood, not at all. It is as red as a carnation, only that. This flower, this light, this moment, this silence, Dominus est." Look around at the place where you find yourself in this moment, simply noticing. Bring your gaze to rest on whatever presents itself. Allow yourself to simply be. Breathe, notice, gaze, cherish and bless. Remain present without abstraction, using Merton's words to guide your practice. Whisper in your heart, this leaf, this twig, this tree. This flower, this light, this moment, this silence, Dominus est. Merton continues, eternity. God passes, God remains. We pass in and out. God passes, we remain. We are nothing, we are everything. God is in us. God is gone from us. God is not here. We are here in God. All these things can be said, but why say them? The flower is itself. Whatever you are gazing at in this moment right now is itself. The light is itself. The silence is itself. I am myself. All perhaps illusions, but no matter, for illusion is the shadow of reality, and reality is the grace and gift that underlies all these things, these colors, this silence. Underlies? Is that true? They are simply real. They are God's gift. I invite you now, if you feel led, to take a few minutes to journal. You might use Merton's words to guide you. This leaf, this tree, this shell. Take just a few moments to write what comes to you. As you close up what you're writing, I'm going to invite you to bring your awareness back to your body. You might wiggle your fingers and toes or notice the chair supporting you. We'll close this time of blessing with a poem read by Lori.
This is a poem written by Denise Levertov in the last years of her very long and productive life about her very first love. It was a flower. There had been, before I could even speak, another child, a girl or a boy unknown, who drew me, and I had this obscure desire to become connected in some way or other. Even to be what I faltered after, falling to hands and knees, crawling a foot or two, clambering up to follow until arms swooped down and bore me away. So that one left no face, had exchanged no gaze with me. But this flower, suddenly there was before I saw it the vague past, and there was now, forever. Nearby was the sandy sweep of the Roman road, and where we sat, the grass was thin. From a bare patch of that poor soil, solitary, sprang the flower, face upturned, looking completely, openly into my eyes. I was barely old enough to repeat its name. convolvulus, said my mother, pale shell pink a chalice, no wider across than a silver sixpence. It looked at me. I looked back. It looked at me. I looked back. Delight filled me as if I, not the flower, were a flower and brimful of rain. And there was endlessness. So perhaps through a lifetime, what I've desired has always been to return to that endless giving and receiving, the wholeness of that attention, that once in a lifetime secret communion.
Thanks, Lori. I'm going to move now into a time of small group discussion. And this is just a time for you to share about your experience. What do you notice when you practice holy attention? What did you notice about the other, about yourself? What did cherishing feel like? How does noticing and cherishing change you?
What a wild family. Fox and giraffe and warthog, of course. But these also, bodies like tiny strings, bodies like blades and blossoms, cordgrass, Christmas fern, soldier moss. And here comes grasshopper, all toes and knees and eyes over the little mounds of dust. When I see a black cricket in the woodpile in autumn, I don't frighten her. And when I see the moss grazing on the grass, I thank her tenderly. I touch her tenderly, and I say, sweet cousin.
Welcome back from your breakout groups. I would have loved to have heard what everyone had to share. All of the creatures who are decorating this slide are found on the International Union for Conservation Red List of Threatened and Endangered Species, and some of them are getting more and more endangered. This is our family that we see when we gaze and when we come into relationship. When we come into that sense of being humbled and that sense of sacredness, that sense of awe and wonder. The poet Jane Hirschfield says, if you gaze deeply enough into being, eventually you will come into the company of everything. If we had another hour, we would spend time just listening for what everyone has noticed. But this is the piece I want to hold up at the moment, is the way in which this practice over time brings us into relationship with the other and brings us into a recognition of radical kinship, that we are sweet cousins. We share not only DNA, we share ecological habitat, we share the air of this planet. We are interconnected both environmentally and ecologically and genetically and socially and in the spirit. If you gaze deeply enough into being, eventually you will awaken into the company of everything. Doug Christie says again, I want to focus on the kind of attention necessary both for cultivating an awareness of beauty and the significance of the living world. Sorry, I didn't read that, but well, an awareness of the beauty and significance of the living world as well as its fragility. You know, as humans, we are wired for this kind of attentiveness. There are stories of scientists in Tanzania going up a ridge and sitting at sunset to look out across Lake Tanganyika and noticing two chimps come up the hill from opposite directions, not realizing the other was coming. And they see each other, they start chuffing to say hello, and then they take each other's hands and they go and they sit and they watch the sunset together. These are not human creatures. These are our sweet cousins, geared by the very existence of their lives to a kind of holy attentiveness. But here's the rub. Gazing at the fragility is really hard. It's easy to look at things that are beautiful. It's a challenge and an extension of this practice to gaze at the difficult places, at the brokenness, at the woundedness of this earth, and to be present with it as you would be present at the bedside of another loved one that was ill or dying. I want to focus on not just beauty, but on fragility. So I had recommended this article, Gaze Even Here, and I'm going to just draw your attention to the picture. And I'm going to tell you a little story about this woman, Trebbie Johnson. She and about 3 or 4 friends decided to spend 5 days or more sitting in a clear cut, gazing not at what was beautiful, but gazing at what was being destroyed and broken. They found a place. This was in Vancouver, British Columbia, for our Canadian friends. They chose to go, they set up camp, and you can almost see the forest that is intact, and then there's this clear cut, and they went every day and sat in the forest, and they gazed even here. And this is what they chose. This is what she says: what would happen if we simply settled into this damaged place, observing the land and our own responses to it? The land and my heart. Our intention was to get to know this place that we heartily wished to run from. Our aversion to pain, it's so natural and something that requires gentleness towards ourselves. But they chose this courageous act to go and sit in this clear cut. And here's what she says: slowly we came to realize that our practice of purposely seeking meaning and beauty in the wounded was teaching us important lessons about wholeness. The place revealed itself to us. They talk about sitting on a log, a stump of an 800-year-old Sitka spruce that had been felled, and being able to lie there like it was a bed, watching insects in little puddles of water, watching the birds, watching a mother bear with her cubs try to make their way across the slash. And then they started noticing their own hearts. One of the gentlemen that was part of this noticed that he just wanted to get up and run away. And then he realized that's the same thing he was doing in his marriage. And he chose to stay and be present with what was difficult. And the forest, the earth that was destroyed, was still teaching him. And what was born in them was the opening of new reserves of compassion. This is not an easy extension of this practice, but it's vital. We discovered that what we had feared would be too painful to bear was not. Somebody recently said, what's happening is unbearable, so choose to bear it. And then, so slowly, we hardly recognized what was happening. We began to love this place, even that which was wounded and destroyed. What on earth is the point of sitting for 5 days in the presence of a forest that's being destroyed? They couldn't fix it. They weren't able to reverse this damage, certainly not in any human timeline. But even in its diminishment, the forest was changing their hearts as they gazed. Time slowed. Wounds began to heal. One of the women made altars on tree stumps. And Trebbie Johnson ended up turning this article into a book titled Radical Joy for Hard Times, which I will show you if I get a chance once we get out of the sharing the screen. So here's the question that we're going to be entertaining for a little moment, recognizing that we have to be gentle with ourselves even as we issue this invitation. We're going to get some input from the other staff. What hard thing invites me to look, and what broken places need me to be present? Where have I seen beauty in a broken world? And I want to share this story, and then we're going to have a few stories from the committee before we go back into our groups. Last summer, my mom fell and was in the hospital and then spent a month in a rehab hospital. And I had read this article about gazing even here. And I walked in the first night, there was trash all over the place. It must have been 85 or 90 degrees in a room because the air conditioners weren't working. There were not enough staff to take care of her. I ended up being there 8 to 12 hours pretty much every day, helping her out. But I chose to gaze even here, and here's what I saw because I chose, since I had to be there anyway, instead of shutting it out, to look and be open and receptive. I could tell you about 5 stories, but I'm going to tell you about one gentleman, quadriplegic, could barely speak. His voice was so soft, but he beckoned me over as best he could. And he said, "Can I sing you a song?" He was a Native American man. And when he started singing, he would go somewhere else and his wounded voice would become strong. And he sang me a chant of what it is to be a friend. And in that broken place, I was able to hear the song of his life, which I wouldn't have been open to if I hadn't chosen this practice. It was an amazing and very hard, difficult experience. The last day we were there, he took me outside and he sang me a traveling song and said to me, "I will never forget you, and I will never forget him." Gaze even here. I want my heart to be open enough, and I'm not going to claim it was easy. I'm not going to claim I stayed in that space every hour and every minute of being there. But I got to hear songs of beauty in the midst of brokenness. Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Oxley from West Seattle. My husband, John Score, died on October 23rd, 2006, when an offshore hurricane created a rogue wave. It rose up unexpectedly and inundated us as we walked along the beach at Cabo San Lucas and swept John into the sea. The trauma and grief of that experience almost destroyed me. I blamed creation and the ocean water for John's tragic death, and I feared waves. Several months later, a caring friend arranged a mountain cabin retreat for me in Colorado. I listlessly agreed, and on a snowy February morning, I borrowed my friend's car, set out for the cabin, and promptly rear-ended a van that had stopped suddenly to avoid an accident. No one was injured, but the car was damaged and my self-confidence was further eroded. The following morning, I set off again to the cabin in a rented vehicle, but snow began to fall. I stopped in the little town of Leon. And walked beside it. Uh-oh.
You were frozen for a moment.
Okay, where did I stop? Where did I stop, Lori?
We stopped in the town.
In the town? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I stopped in the town of Lyons, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, and decided to spend my retreat in a motel there instead of going up the mountain to the cabin. I found a small deserted park on the banks of a frozen creek and walked beside it, watching the open pools where turbulent black water kept the ice from freezing solid. One particular hole in the ice caught my attention, and I sat on a snowbank, gazing at it. Water is good, I repeated to myself without conviction. Water gives life to fish and creatures in the river. It nourishes the trees along the banks. Water is good. I repeated it several times, trying to believe, as I gazed ever more intently at the swirling pool. But the old thoughts came, unbidden. Yes, water gives life, but it also deals death. If a small dam upstream were to break, a wall of water and ice would come roaring around that bend and wipe out these trees, these rocks, and myself. Water gives life, but it also deals death. In the thoughtful silence that followed, a transforming truth burst into my mind. And so do I. I can bring life or deal death, intentionally or accidentally. Yesterday, with no intent to hurt or damage, I caused destruction with that car. All of creation is like that. Built into the very nature of created being is the potential to give life or take it. The sea had no ill intent toward John. That wave did not single him out, it simply existed. It was not God's will that John was swept away. It was 100 small choices we made that resulted in John being at the wrong place and time. Blaming God or nature is futile and irrational. All I can do is accept and begin again. The long journey. It took months of going to beaches, gazing at breakers small and large, to overcome my fear of waves. It took trauma counseling, a grief support group, and hard work. And I began to live again. It all began on the frozen bank of an ice-bound creek, when I had the courage to gaze more deeply at the black swirling water I had thought was my mortal enemy.
I'm generally a really happy, positive person, and have always told my kids and then my grandkids, you can do anything you have to do for 2 weeks or 2 months. I can go inside into my heart and close my eyes and just be in my heart with me and feel graciousness and safety and purity. And then I all of a sudden am ambushed by thoughts of white supremacy and Black Lives Matter and our poor Mother Earth that's dying. And I find myself just at a place where I can't, I'm so angry and I'm fearful, and I'm trying to find a place for this ambiguous loss. And I am a hopeful person.
I'm Dean White, and Susie, my wife, who you just heard speak, has been struggling, as have we all, with all of the challenges coming at us so quickly and so relentlessly over this past several months. There's a blog on the Spirituality and Practice website called Praying the News, which itself is a spiritual practice. And on the blog, you'll find prayer offerings prompted by eyes turned with a gaze toward the difficult news of the day. Prayers like the blessing of the masks, or tiny prayers for the COVID-19 pandemic. or a meditation on the animals of Australia, or praying for preservation of the Amazon rainforest, prayer for endangered species, and so on. In keeping with this practice, I'm going to share a prayer from this morning's Mission Center service, which some of you have already heard. It was prompted by the theme for the day, but also by the overwhelming accumulation of news in the last several weeks. God, we come seeking blessing, mired in our lament. We lament the loss of justice hard fought for through making good trouble. We hunger for equitable justice for those to whom it has been so long denied. We lament the destruction of species through our carelessness. We hunger for the preservation of those species which remain. We lament for the very earth under our feet, whose rocks cry out as they are fractured by our relentless quest for finite energy. We hunger for warmth and light from sustainable sources. We lament the destruction of our homes and our livelihoods by prayer, by fire and pestilence left unchecked. We hunger for that shared, drawn breath in community with those we love and with the stranger whose breath has made us fearful. We lament being crushed in the struggle for power by those who have forgotten the meaning of love. We hunger for peace, for an end to hatred, for an equitable sharing of power over our lives, and for the honoring of agency over our bodies. Creator, you have blessed us immeasurably over the millennia of our presence on your created earth, and you bless us still. Yet we must acknowledge, Lord, how we have so often squandered the gifts you have given us. Let us open our eyes and cast our gaze on the depths of your lament. Let us lift up our gaze to seek paths out of our wilderness. You have rained blessings on us as you rained bread on your people in the Sinai. But it is left to us to gather and harvest and prepare and share the bread and the blessings we have received. Lord, we commit to finding your presence in those blessings and honoring them with our actions from this day forward. Amen.
My story is about the first time that I think I truly experienced lament and kind of came to know what that meant for myself. There's a trio of trees, or there was a trio of trees at Graceland University where I went to school, sort of between the administration building and the library, kind of on that side in the field. And I used to go there a lot. I loved sitting in that little trio and being able to see all of campus, but also feel kind of protected and held. And it was just a really special place for me on campus. And towards the end of my time at Graceland, they built the new Fit Center, which is great. But it also meant that those trees had to come down. And I remember seeing that they had been marked off to be cut down. And I was like riding my bike on campus and just sort of swerved towards them and kind of like touched where they had been painted and just sat with them and wept kind of uncontrollably. And it was this really profound experience of feeling like I was connecting to God's grief, that like somehow my grief was drawing me closer to God because God also grieved this. And it's lingered with me since then. You know, I often think about the gift of those trees and their loss as well. And it's what I go back to when I want to think about what lament is, about how we can align our grief with God's grief and grow closer to God that way. And so I want to offer a chance for all of you to get to kind of share about your own experience. What hard thing invites you to look? What broken place calls you to be present? Or perhaps where have you seen beauty in our broken world? And we're going to take just a few minutes. Just because of time, I think I'm going to go ahead and put you into your small groups and let you have a conversation with each other, and then we will come back after about 10 minutes. So this is a shorter time to be together, so be mindful in your sharing. So thank you. Welcome back, everyone. You may hear the cries of my cat behind me. He has his own feelings of lament. I'm going to bring us back with another poem by Mary Oliver, and I know she's been present with us quite a bit today. What I love about Mary Oliver, and also just this poem in particular, is that she is willing to take your hand and move you closer to something that is difficult to look at. It's hard, but she also doesn't leave you alone. This is a poem called Lead. Here is a story to break your heart. Are you willing? This winter, the loons came to our harbor and died, one by one, of nothing we could see. A friend told me one on the shore that lifted its head and opened the elegant beak and cried out in the long, sweet savoring of its life, which, if you have heard it, you know is a sacred thing, and for which, if you have not heard it, you had better hurry to where they still sing. And believe me, tell no one just where that is. The next morning, this loon, speckled and iridescent, and with a plan to fly home to some hidden lake, was dead on the shore. I tell you this to break your heart, by which I mean only that it break open and never close again to the rest of the world.
As we come to a close, we're probably going to go maybe about 5 minutes over. I hope that you will grant us that grace. But I don't want to leave without blessing us in two ways. One is that I'm going to invite you now to share a sense of blessing with each other in the chat function. And as we do that, I'm going to tell you a little story while you're writing your chat. So go ahead and work on those chats. And then we're going to close with another beautiful meditation from Genesis that reminds us who it is that brought this world into being, that Joan's going to share with us. So go ahead with your chat blessings, either for something which you have seen or for each other. Barbara Brown Taylor says that to pronounce a blessing on something it requires us to be able to see it as it is. And that's what we're trying to do here, is open our hearts large enough to see the world as it is and allow the sacred, the holy, to speak its truth and beauty in spite of and through our lament. Here's my blessing and invitation. I live in Central Oregon, and up until yesterday, I have been living in a choking suffocating, vision-reducing cloud of smoke. I'm not in danger locally, although I do have friends who have lost their homes on the McKenzie River. I have friends of friends who have lost their homes in various places in Oregon. And this is what showed up for me in my meditation, and I want to offer it as a blessing. If you looked out my window over here, you would look out to the Ochiko Mountains to the east and north. To the west are the Cascade Mountains, mountains rimmed. When that smoke, all of the debris from those fires, all the carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide came over those mountains and settled in here, I could barely see across my street, let alone out across the expanse of landscape that is mine normally. And here's what I realized was, in spite of the smoke, in spite of all of the grief and lament, in spite of the fact of the uncertainty that I do not know what my actions need to be, I don't know how anything is going to turn out. What I do know is that the expanse that's big enough to hold us all is still there, whether I can see the horizon or not. The horizon is there, and what is beyond the horizon is there. We move into lament and grief, and we acknowledge it, and I know it's hard and sometimes hurts our hearts, but here's the deal. When I allow myself to be present and let the winds blow the grief, blow the smoke through, instead of trying to hold it off when I can't really hold it off anyway, it clears room for the imagination to show up and to bring hope, and maybe to show me what the next step, at least for my little small part of this, might be. And so that's the blessing I would offer, is that we have just that extra little bit of courage because we're willing to look at beauty and we're willing to lament, to create space for hope, to breathe fresh air of the spirit, and to trust that we will see the horizon and what is beyond the horizon. And maybe I won't even see it in my lifetime, but I do believe the new creation is coming. And it is that visioning to which we will be turning in our fourth and final conversation in this first series. So just looking for a few moments at some of those chat blessings. I'm going to go ahead and let Emily read some of those. And then Joan is going to close us with her meditation on Genesis.
I'm so moved by all of the blessings that you've been writing in the chat. May bless our grasping at hope for the future. May we see that we are all one. We are all one. Blessings to all who are open both to hear and to share the depth of your being. May broken hearts begin to heal and strengthen for our work ahead, for the planet and creation. May God's weeping lead each of us into empathy and action for the other. May we never lose our hope of God's vision for the world and your desire to join God in bringing it to pass. There are so many more. I hope you get a chance to kind of scroll through. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing.
For those of you who need to leave right at the half hour, we understand. For those of you who can stay, we want to close our time today by taking a few moments to continue our focus on the process of creation through a short meditation based on Genesis chapter 1. So close your eyes now, or if you prefer, simply gaze softly at the picture. Get comfortable in your chair. Take a few deep breaths. Relax your shoulders. Relax all the muscles of your face, especially your jaw. Breathe in peace and calm. Breathe out tension and anxiety. Just let it all go. Imagine or picture it in your mind. In the beginning, before the beginning of life as we know it, about 11 billion years after the Big Bang, after our galaxy, solar system, and planet were formed and set in their perpetual orbits. After about 1 billion years of bacteria and lichens continuously interacting with pulverized rock to form soil, and then hundreds of millions of years of cycles of plant growth and decay, leading to deeper soils and larger, more complex plants. Eventually, there came to be the animal kingdom. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth. Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things and wild animals." And it was so. God created every living creature and blessed them. From insects with a lifespan of a single day, through tiny coral reef fish living just 1 month, to giant sharks who live almost 300 years. There are at least 2 million species identified so far in the animal kingdom. Creatures that dive or swim or soar through the air, run like the wind, or creep along the ground. Herbivores who eat only plants, and carnivores who eat only other creatures. Each one a part of the continuous cycle of birth, feeding, and death. A complex and intricate food chain of life that has evolved and adapted. Adapted as ice ages and tropical climates have come and gone. As volcanoes have spewed lava and ash. As forest fires have raged and hurricanes have roared. As the seas have risen and fallen. And as diseases have decimated populations. Billions upon billions of creatures living for and in the present moment, unaffected by memories of previous pain or forethought of future grief. A continuous celebration of life as it is experienced in the now, with each different species living true to its nature. And as some species, like dinosaurs, went extinct when the shifts happened too quickly, so there are thousands of new species being discovered each year. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God saw that it was good. May we continue to expand the gratitude in our hearts and minds, and look with eyes of awe and reverence as we continue to create with God. And it shall continue to be good. Welcome back, and thank you for your participation. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Blessings and deep gratitude from all of us to all of you. See you in October.